I didn't get a warning. I got a threat screamed across my driveway like a siren. HOA Karen pointed that shaky clipboard at me and announced that our neighborhood Christmas party was shut down by authority, and anyone who showed up would be cited, fined, and possibly arrested. She didn't even blink when kids heard her. She wanted fear. She wanted obedience. She wanted the whole street to understand that December didn't belong to Christmas anymore. It belonged to her. She said our gathering was illegal commercial activity and that she had direct lines to city officials who would make sure my little rebellion ended badly. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't bother hiding the truth from myself. She wasn't protecting anything. She was drunk on control and terrified that people had learned to live without asking permission. The worst part was how casual she was about it. She talked about shutting down joy like someone talks about moving a trash can. She thought a stack of paper made her a queen. She thought a title made her untouchable. She thought I was just another neighbor she could bully quiet. She had no idea who she was talking to. She had no idea the city official she bragged about knowing was standing 3 feet away, and he was done watching her choke the life out of his community. That was the moment I stopped being polite. Not loud, not dramatic, just finished. She kept talking, listing fines, quoting rules she barely understood, threatening parents who were already tired of shielding their kids from her voice. I watched her unravel with every sentence, waving that clipboard like a weapon, convinced that paper turned into handcuffs if she shouted the paragraph numbers loudly enough. Inside, I already knew the party was happening. I already knew the permits were valid. I already knew exactly which agencies had opened files with her name highlighted at the top. All I had to do was let her keep proving who she was in front of everyone she'd spent months trying to control. She thought she walked into someone else's story to take over. She walked straight into mine. She didn't start this with decorations, or noise complaints, or parking rules. She started it with entitlement, the kind that rots from the inside out, the kind that makes someone believe their irritation is law. She'd spent months pushing people until they bent, smiling when they apologized to her for existing on their own property. She loved it when people looked down at the ground while she talked. She loved late-night notes, early morning emails, and midday confrontations that left people shaken at their own mailboxes. She called it standards. It was domination. There's a difference. And she thought nobody would ever have the authority to tell her so to her face. She chose Christmas because it was loud and bright and impossible for her to control unless she broke it. She hated that families gathered without asking her first. She hated that kids laughed in clumps instead of straight lines. She hated music that wasn't approved, lights that weren't symmetrical, and joy that didn't bow. So she did what people like her always do when they can't own a thing. She tried to destroy it. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? The letters came first, full of legal-looking fonts and sentences that curled around themselves like snakes. Then came the meetings where she didn't listen, she declared. After that came the threats disguised as reminders. She grew bolder each time nobody pushed back, each time someone paid a fine just to be left alone, each time fear did more work than enforcement ever could. She mistook silence for victory. She mistook tolerance for weakness. She mistook my quiet for ignorance. She never once stopped to imagine that the man bagging leaves in his yard after council sessions was the same person signing city orders. She never considered that the neighbor who waved politely and kept to himself was sitting behind the desk she bragged about having connections inside of. I didn't expose myself then. I watched, I counted, I read every complaint she filed, every exaggerated lie dressed as a violation, every email where she used community integrity as a cover word for personal annoyance. I saw how she targeted those least able to fight back: single parents, elderly residents, immigrants new to town, families still finding their footing. She threatened property values like a blunt instrument and called herself a protector while isolating the very people she pretended to represent. Every document she sent out as intimidation landed directly in my professional world, like she slid the rope across her own neck and kept pulling. She thought she was invincible because she'd never met anyone willing to look her in the eye and not flinch. Then she decided to shut down the Christmas party, and she found me. I didn't move into this neighborhood to be the mayor here. I moved here to be a dad, a husband, A man who could shovel his driveway without someone turning it into a headline. People saw me grilling in the backyard, carrying groceries, waving from the porch, and they assumed I had a normal downtown job, something vague involving offices and emails. I let them think that because anonymity was the only way my family ever got peace. My daughters could ride their bikes without every conversation turning into politics. My wife could talk to neighbors without someone pitching projects, favors, or grudges. For 18 months, that quiet separation held, and then HOA Karen arrived like a storm that never stopped circling. She wasn't elected because people loved her. She was elected because people were tired, because most decent folks don't campaign for tiny thrones. She filled the empty space with certainty and rules and the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Her version of leadership was simple: talk louder than everyone else and never admit you're wrong. She brought with her stacks of bylaws nobody had read in decades, highlighted passages she barely understood, and an obsession with being the person everyone had to pass through to do anything. She spoke about standards, the way some people speak about religion, with the same promise of punishment for those who didn't worship correctly. The first time she fined a veteran for a flag, I knew exactly what she was, not because of the rule she cited, but because of the pleasure she took in citing it. The first time she threatened a single mother over toys left in the yard, I saw how she chose her targets. The first time she cornered elderly neighbors with lectures they were too polite to walk away from, I understood she didn't want a community. She wanted subjects. I stayed silent publicly, but I didn't stay still. Every letter she sent eventually crossed my desk at City Hall under my official title. Every complaint she filed landed in digital records under my authority. She thought she was whispering to powerful strangers. She was talking directly to me the entire time. 6 months of documentation stacked themselves into an unintentional confession she kept writing with her own hands. I watched the neighborhood change under her. Decorations disappeared. Laughter dulled. People walked faster to their doors, glancing over shoulders like criminals on their own lawns. She thought that meant she was winning. To her, fear was proof of effectiveness. To me, it was the signal that the line had already been crossed. I promised myself I would not intervene as the mayor unless she threatened safety or tried to take something essential away from the community. Then she went for Christmas. Then she went for children. Then she decided she could cancel joy by decree. That was when Ethan the neighbor ended, and Ethan the mayor walked onto the field she had been bragging about owning. I didn't need speeches. I didn't need to raise my voice. Real authority doesn't shout. It just arrives and doesn't move. Power doesn't start with handcuffs or uniforms. It starts with who people are afraid to say no to. And HOA Karen built her little empire on that single word. No one voted for her because they admired her. They voted because they didn't want to be the next target, because she promised to handle things, because she sounded like she knew exactly what she was talking about even when she didn't. She stacked the board with people who never disagreed, who nodded on cue, who liked proximity to authority more than they liked their neighbors. Meetings stopped being conversations and became performances where she read from printed pages like they were sacred law. If you spoke up, you were hostile. If you disagreed, you were non-compliant. If you asked for proof, you were disruptive to order. She turned yard toys into violations, chalk drawings into property damage, and holiday decorations into code infractions. The worst part wasn't the fines. It was the humiliation she attached to them. She delivered notices in person when she knew people were home. She raised her voice just enough for neighbors to hear. She liked seeing people shrink in their own doorways. She liked the way silence settled in after she left, like dust after a demolition. I watched it all. Veterans warned for flags brushing tree branches. Widows lectured for lawn edges not cut perfectly straight. Parents written up because bikes leaned against fences. She patrolled at night, photographing porches, counting trash bins, prowling like a self-appointed warden whose badge existed only in her imagination, but still managed to scare people who didn't know the difference. She kept files on families, printed and labeled, like personal trophies. She called it records. I called it what it was: surveillance wrapped in stationery. She claimed everything she did was for property values, as if humanity depreciated when kids laughed too loudly or lights weren't perfectly symmetrical. And slowly, the neighborhood bent. Decorations disappeared. Conversations stopped on sidewalks when she turned the corner. Curtains moved when she walked past. Not from curiosity, but from reflex. People stopped asking what they wanted to do and started asking what she would allow. That's how small tyrannies grow, not with armies, but with size and tiredness and the belief that it's easier to comply than to confront. But every step she took tightened the same circle she would one day find herself standing in alone. I documented everything in silence. Dates, times, letters, emails, recordings neighbors offered with shaking hands because they didn't know who else to trust. She thought she was untouchable because nobody pushed back in public. What she never saw was the quiet alignment happening under the surface. Neighbors talking to neighbors, patterns recognized, courage rediscovered inch by inch. When she announced she was shutting down the Christmas party for the good of the community, she believed it was the final proof she owned us. She didn't realize it was the last straw proving she never had. The truth didn't arrive with trumpets. It came in through my laptop screen at midnight with the soft glow of a government database and the steady calm that always settles over me when chaos finally meets facts. I looked up the HOA's corporate status, not as a neighbor arguing over decorations, but as the mayor responsible for whether any of this so-called authority even existed. The result appeared in one plain line of text: inactive, expired, non-compliant for more than 2 years. Everything she had waved in people's faces, every threat, every citation, every fine stacked like bricks against families already stretched thin, had been printed on the letterhead of an organization that, legally speaking, didn't even exist anymore. She had been ruling with smoke and posture, and nobody had checked for the wires because fear keeps people from asking simple questions. I sat there for a long moment, not out of shock, but because of what it meant for everyone she'd hurt. Then I started pulling threads. Financial filings, non-existent. Required annual documents, missing. Fees collected under authority she didn't have, recorded in her own handwriting. I didn't speculate. I didn't assume. I built a record the same way she built fear, piece by piece until it was undeniable. The numbers didn't just fail to add up. They told a story of someone who believed they would never be required to explain anything. Double billing for services the city already provided, assessments invented to fund her legal vanity, and letters laced with threats sent through the mail under a corporate name that had no legal standing at all. Every one of those things has a word in the law, and none of those words meant power. Neighbors began arriving at my door quietly, not because I had revealed who I was, but because people can sense when someone is no longer intimidated. They brought envelopes, emails, recordings of her late-night warnings where she promised consequences she had no authority to deliver. I didn't tell them my title. I didn't need to. I just told them to keep every scrap of paper and to stop paying anything she demanded until someone who knew the law looked at it. Meanwhile, she escalated, because that's all she knew how to do. More letters, more meetings, more declarations spoken in that brittle voice that cracked when anyone asked a question. Every threat she sent came through systems I oversee. Every complaint she filed landed on my official desk. Every attempt to use the city as her personal hammer echoed directly into the office of the man she'd spent months invoking as her ally. I sent quiet inquiries to the state. I opened administrative reviews. I forwarded financial inconsistencies to the appropriate departments without adding a single adjective. Real processes began to move, not theater, not power trips, just the slow, heavy machinery of actual governance she had pretended to possess. And while those wheels turned, I watched the neighborhood wake up. Mrs. Patterson formed a research group at her dining table. Veterans organized documentation crews. Parents started saying no without whispering. People discovered that fear evaporates when you finally look straight at the thing you're afraid of. She felt it slipping. You could see it in the way she started talking faster, in the new notes she taped to doors in the middle of the night, in the way her eyes scanned crowds not for violations but for loyalties. What she didn't know was that the case file with her name on it had already grown thicker than the stack of citations she loved to wave at everyone else. She thought she was waging a war of willpower. She was actually providing evidence to people whose job is to read it. The day of the party arrived with the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther, and every noise in the neighborhood felt sharper, clearer, impossible for her to ignore. Extension cords stretched across yards. Ladders leaned against trees. You could smell cocoa, pine, and food being warmed in kitchens she had tried for months to control. She told herself it wouldn't happen, that her threats were enough, that people would fold like they always had. Then she saw the first tables go up, and realized the spell was broken. She didn't walk to the backyard. She stormed, like weather arriving without warning, coat flaring, clipboard clutched like it was armor that had already stopped working. She didn't greet anyone. She announced violations, declared the event illegal, promised fines and police action in the same breath as if fear was oxygen and she was running out of air. Parents didn't argue. They didn't beg. They just kept setting out plates. Kids didn't scatter. They laughed louder. That silence she relied on was gone, replaced not by shouting but by the one thing she could never control: indifference to her imagined authority. She called the police in front of everyone, voice shaking, demanding immediate intervention, listing laws she didn't understand into a phone connected to systems I oversee. When the cruisers rolled in, lights flashing against snow, she actually smiled, convinced the world still worked the way she needed it to. She marched toward the officers like a commander approaching troops, already pointing, already ordering, already trying to orchestrate the consequences that were no longer hers to give. The officers listened, patient, professional, then simply stepped past her and into the crowd to make sure families were safe and traffic was clear. She followed them, voice rising, insisting they shut it down now, invoking authority she didn't have, invoking my office like a magic phrase that had always opened doors for her. I stepped forward only when she demanded, in front of everyone, that the mayor arrive immediately to witness the criminal conspiracy of children singing in a backyard. I didn't change clothes. I didn't stand on anything. I just told her my name and my title the same way I'd tell someone the time of day. Shock didn't hit her all at once. It washed through her in stages, each recognition heavier than the last. Her mouth formed objections she couldn't finish because every sentence she tried to build collapsed under the weight of the emails, complaints, and threats she knew she'd sent. She searched the crowd for allies and found the same neighbors she'd spent months intimidating now watching her the way you watch a storm move past. No longer dangerous, just almost over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told her the event was permitted, lawful, documented, and protected. I told her that every fine she'd issued under an inactive corporation was under review. I told her that threatening families under the guise of non-existent authority had consequences beyond anything she could write on paper. She tried to interrupt, but even her interruptions sounded small now. Stripped of the echo fear used to give them, law enforcement didn't swarm her. There were no theatrics. There was just procedure, slow and undeniable, real authority replacing the imitation she'd worn like a costume for years. Papers she once weaponized were now being read back to her as evidence. Cameras that once intimidated neighbors now recorded her, not as the enforcer she imagined, but as the defendant reality had quietly prepared her to become. The party didn't stop for any of it. Music played, children sang, people hugged. Life continued its steady rhythm around her unraveling, and that was the clearest message of all. She had never been the center of anything but her own story. And that story had finally reached the part where nobody listened anymore. She thought the confrontation was the climax, but it was only the moment the lights came up on everything she'd been hiding, and now the real work began. Retaliation wasn't about shouting, it was about precision, and every document she had ever waved like a weapon was now turned facing her. I shifted fully into the role she had invoked for months without understanding what it meant. First came the verification, real signatures, real seals, real authority, replacing the counterfeit kingdom she had ruled through fear and assumption. Legal teams didn't posture, they confirmed. Investigators didn't threaten, they collected. She kept asking who had reported her, desperate to drag someone else onto the stage, but there was no single enemy to blame anymore. The problem was the record she had created in her own handwriting, in her own emails, In her own recorded meetings where she'd grown too confident to hide the contempt she felt for the very people she was meant to serve. It wasn't personal revenge. It was the system she tried to impersonate, finally walking into the room. While she sputtered about vendettas, the auditors laid out timelines, bank statements, contracts that never existed but had still been billed as if they had. Her voice got smaller with each page turned, as if the sound itself was being absorbed by the weight of paper surrounding her. She kept trying to reach for intimidation and found only procedure waiting. Retaliation looked nothing like she expected. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic speeches, just signatures being applied in the correct order, while she realized that every shortcut she took had led in a straight line to this table. Even the police didn't treat her like an adversary anymore. They treated her like a case file, unfolding the way case files do when reality catches up to fantasy. The neighbors she had terrified for months didn't gloat. They didn't need to. Justice works best in quiet rooms, where truth is written out plainly, and arrogance has nowhere to hide. Her last attempt at control came as a plea, not a command, asking for consideration, for understanding, for the kind of mercy she had never shown when she stood on porches announcing penalties with practiced boredom. She wanted exceptions. What she received was accuracy. Retaliation was not rage meeting rage. It was expertise dismantling pretense piece by piece until what was left was simply the truth she had spent months running past, now standing directly in front of her, with nowhere else to go. Victory didn't arrive with cheering crowds or fireworks. It arrived in paperwork being filed, in doors closing behind officials, in the sound of her voice finally losing its echo over the neighborhood she once believed bowed to her. The weight she had pressed on everyone else lifted slowly, almost shyly, like the first morning after a storm when people step outside to see what's left standing. Letters stopped coming. Threats stopped appearing in mailboxes like poison gifts. The board she controlled dissolved into silence, and for the first time in months, porches filled with ordinary conversations instead of nervous glances. Christmas lights stayed up longer than usual that year. Not because of celebration, but because nobody felt forced to take them down on someone else's schedule anymore. She tried one last time to reclaim the voice she'd used like a siren, but it came out thin, almost apologetic, swallowed by the very rules she used to whip people into line. Meetings weren't about her anymore. They were about repairs, about neighbors introducing themselves again like survivors checking each other for injuries. The authority she worshipped didn't roar when it moved. It simply corrected the record and stepped aside. The neighborhood didn't declare triumph. It exhaled. Kids rode bikes down streets that no longer felt like corridors patrolled by a single person's temper. People decorated however they wanted without photographing everything first, in case they needed proof of innocence. Mailboxes held nothing but mail. Her house, once the loudest presence in the subdivision without making a sound, faded into the background like a stage set after the actors have gone home. Nobody chased her. Nobody needed revenge. The strongest answer to control was ordinary life returning and refusing to look back. She wasn't debated anymore. She wasn't feared. She wasn't relevant. The final victory didn't feel like a shout. It felt like quiet, like snow falling on sidewalks she no longer dictated, like a neighborhood that chose normal over drama and never asked her permission again. Doors stayed open, laughter carried at night, and somewhere beyond all of that, far past the place where fines and threats used to live, HOA Karen went silent.